Was over a $2.50 fare. Apparently 3 individuals tried to get on this bus. They did not want to pay the driver, and that is when this dispute happened and went off the bus where this driver was.
Oh shit! Oh shit! Yeah! We are learning that deadly attack started with a dispute over a sandwich order.
In this video, we're examining 2 cases where everyday moments turned deadly, and where the real horror wasn't who pulled the trigger, but how fast everything spiraled out of control. The first case, Leroy Ramos, a quiet Marta bus driver in Georgia, showed up for work like he always did. But after a dispute over a $2.50 fare, 3 teens escalated things in seconds. Threats, shouting, a gun drawn, and then 8 shots. Caught on camera. Leroy collapsed on the sidewalk, killed in front of his own bus. Now we shift to Harlem, New York, where Cruz, a 24-year-old transgender woman, got into a heated argument with Ray Hodge, a postal worker, over something as simple as a place in line at a deli. Within minutes, Cruz pulled out a knife and stabbed him to death in front of stunned customers. 2 cities. 2 ordinary days. 2 lives cut short over nothing more than ego, anger, and a failure to walk away. These aren't just tragedies, they're warnings. Let's break them down. Leroy Ramos was in a good place. After years of hard work, he finally married his high school sweetheart, Monique, in 2023. They packed up their life in New York and moved to Atlanta, hoping to raise their family in a calmer, more affordable city. He had 3 kids and wanted to give them stability. Atlanta seemed like the right move. In October 2024, Leroy started driving buses for Marta. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. The hours were steady, the pay was decent, and most importantly, it gave him time with his family. That's what mattered to him. He was the kind of man people described as dependable. He didn't gossip, didn't start problems. He showed up, drove his route, helped riders, and went home. A quiet man who kept to himself, always polite, always respectful. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't trained for combat. He didn't sign up for danger. Just a man behind the wheel, doing his part to take care of his family. That day on the bus, Leroy was just enforcing a rule. Asking for a fare. Something he'd probably done hundreds of times before. But this time, it ended in a way no one could have seen coming. Leroy Ramos had never met the teens who stepped onto his bus that day. There was no personal history. No argument carried over from a past ride. They were strangers, just kids who didn't want to pay. But this wasn't just a random moment gone wrong. It was part of something bigger. For years, Marta drivers had been sounding the alarm. They talked about being harassed, screamed at, even threatened with guns. Some were spit on. Others pushed or punched. A few, like Leroy, didn't survive. The system told them to de-escalate, to stay calm, to avoid conflict. But when you're alone behind the wheel with no security and no backup, what does that really mean? Leroy wasn't trained for confrontations. He wasn't armed. He didn't have a panic button that would make someone show up in seconds. He had a fare box, a schedule, and a seatbelt. That's it. He did what any rule-following worker would do. He asked the riders to pay. But that simple act, in that environment, turned into something deadly. If you're finding these stories meaningful or informative, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep bringing you more content like this. On January 3, 2025, Leroy Ramos had just pulled into the Decatur Marta station, doing his evening rounds like he always did. Passengers got on and off. It was routine, until 3 teens stepped onto the bus and refused to pay the $2.50 fare. Authorities did not reveal their names publicly. Leroy did what he was supposed to do. He told them they needed to pay. The teens pushed back. Voices were raised. One threatened to spit on him. Another shouted and cursed. People nearby took out their phones. Some started recording. Leroy stayed calm. He didn't put his hands on anyone. He didn't threaten. He stood by the rules he'd been trained to follow. But then one of those teens took it further. He pulled a gun. No warning. No hesitation. Just gunfire. 8 shots. 3 hit Leroy. 1 in the arm, 1 in the chest, 1 in the stomach. He fell to the pavement just outside the bus doors. People screamed. Some ran. The disappeared into the crowd. Leroy was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. He died from his injuries not long after arriving. This wasn't a robbery. He was murdered over a fare, on camera in public while doing his job. Surveillance footage and bystander videos showed everything. What started as a basic fare dispute ended with a husband and father bleeding out on the sidewalk. And it confirmed every fear Marta drivers had been voicing for years, that someday asking someone to pay might get them killed. As soon as the shots were fired, calls started flooding in. Marta police and Decatur officers responded fast. At the scene they managed to detain 2 of the teens. But the shooter had already taken off. Within hours, the incident was all over local news.
Someone shot and killed a Marta bus driver in Decatur tonight.
Cell phone footage of the confrontation was circulating online. People were shocked by the speed of the violence. But more than that, they were angry. This wasn't just about a single shooting. This was about what the shooting represented. Leroy wasn't armed. He didn't provoke anyone. He was simply doing his job. And yet, there he was, killed in public view over pocket change. Police launched a statewide manhunt. They had clear video of the shooter's face. His name spread fast. Tips came in. For 3 days, law enforcement searched across Georgia. Then the teen turned himself in. All 3 were charged with murder and aggravated assault. And though the legal process had only begun, public opinion had already taken a stand. People asked, how could something like this even happen? Why did a 17-year-old have a gun? Why were Marta drivers expected to handle these confrontations alone? Why hadn't anyone listened to their safety concerns before? For transit workers across the country, Leroy's death wasn't a freak incident. It was the nightmare they all feared. And now that it had happened, there was no looking away. The system had failed someone who did everything right. And the cost was permanent. The teen who pulled the trigger was just 17. No record. No known history of violence. On paper, he wasn't someone you'd expect to commit murder. But that didn't change what happened that night, or how quickly he escalated the situation. Witnesses said he was the loudest of the group. The first to get aggressive. He threatened to spit on Leroy, cursed at him, acted like the rules didn't apply. And then, without warning, he drew a gun and fired 8 rounds. It wasn't self-defense. I didn't panic. It was deliberate. That gun didn't just appear. He brought it with him, onto a public bus. That alone raises a different kind of question. Was he already prepared to use it? Was he waiting for the smallest excuse to prove something? To show dominance in front of his friends? After the shooting, he ran. The other 2 teens stayed close to the scene, maybe hoping to blend in, maybe thinking it wouldn't trace back to them. But the shooter knew what he'd done, and he disappeared. In the end, cameras caught everything. The faces, the clothes, the voices. There was no hiding. No spinning the truth. All 3 teens were charged as adults. The charges were serious: murder and aggravated assault. There would be no juvenile court, no soft landing. This was going to be a full criminal trial in DeKalb County Superior Court. Prosecutors had what most cases dream of: clear surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, cell phone videos, and ballistics to back it all up. They didn't need to prove much. The evidence was there, start to finish. It was just a matter of presenting it. The defense had few options. They might point to age, claim immaturity, or bring up difficult upbringings. But those arguments weren't likely to change what people had seen with their own eyes. Early on, no plea deals were made public. And the victim's family didn't want leniency. Neither did the Marta Union, nor the broader community. For them, this wasn't just about 3 teenagers. It was about every driver who's been ignored, every complaint that's gone unanswered, and every life put at risk without proper protection. Everyone wanted justice. But justice, in this case, meant more than convictions. It meant accountability on every level. The trial still hasn't reached a verdict, but for Marta workers and the community, the damage is already done. Leroy Ramos was killed for doing his job, and that truth alone sparked outrage across Atlanta. Union leaders pushed for stronger protections, calling for tougher penalties and more security on high-risk routes. A balloon memorial grew outside the Decatur station. Marta promised reforms, but for Leroy's wife and kids, no promise brings him back. His death wasn't just personal, it became a symbol. A kind, quiet man doing honest work, gunned down over $2.50. Since then, transit workers nationwide have spoken up, sharing their own close calls and calling out a system that left them exposed. This is the story of Cruz, a 24-year-old transgender woman who fatally stabbed a man during a confrontation that began over something as trivial as a spot in line to order food. On January 2, 2025, Cruz stabbed and killed Ray Hodge, a 36-year-old USPS postal worker, after a heated argument inside a Harlem deli escalated out of control. Jaya Cruz, born in the year 2000, was raised in Harlem, New York City. Harlem has long stood as a symbol of artistic, musical, and social influence, yet it has also struggled with ongoing challenges such as poverty, crime, and systemic inequality. Cruz's upbringing reflected these conflicting forces. Standing at an imposing 6 feet 5 inches tall, Jaya was a striking figure. Impossible to overlook whether she was walking through the neighborhood or interacting with locals. Her height alone made her presence memorable. But despite Harlem's strong sense of unity and culture, Jaya's early life was far from easy. She faced numerous personal hardships and lived through periods of instability, which led to multiple encounters with law enforcement throughout her youth and into early adulthood. By the time she turned 24, Cruz had already been arrested 5 times. These run-ins with the law painted a picture of a young woman locked in a difficult cycle, struggling with internal battles, unresolved trauma, and behavioral patterns that kept bringing her into conflict with others. One particularly troubling incident happened in July 2020, in Midtown West, Manhattan. During that episode, Jaya reportedly confronted another individual while holding an open box cutter, shouting, "I'm going to cut him." Her aggressive outburst and threatening behavior became part of a growing pattern. There is even video footage of her at another incident, where she appears visibly disrespectful and disruptive toward everyone present at the scene. When police arrived at the scene of an earlier incident involving Jaya Cruz, they issued clear commands for her to get on the ground. However, Jaya refused to comply with the officers' orders, resulting in an additional charge of resisting arrest. Shockingly, just 2 weeks after that arrest, Jaya once again found herself in serious legal trouble, this time for allegedly participating in an armed robbery. According to reports, a knife was used during the commission of the crime. The involvement of a weapon not only intensified the severity of the offense but also served as yet another example of Jaya's troubling association with violence. The back-to-back nature of these incidents suggested more than just poor decision-making. It pointed toward deep-rooted behavioral struggles and possibly unaddressed mental health issues that had gone unchecked for far too long. Despite multiple encounters with the criminal justice system, it appeared that very little meaningful intervention had taken place. The repeated arrests and short-term consequences did little to alter the trajectory of Jaya's life. Rather than providing her with rehabilitation, counseling, or support systems that could address underlying issues, the justice system's responses seemed to revolve more around containment than correction. This failure left Jaya drifting toward more serious consequences, an eventual path that would culminate in a tragic, irreversible act of violence. Interestingly, despite her numerous appearances in police records and local headlines, very little is publicly known about Jaya Cruz's personal life. Information regarding her family background, friendships, or romantic relationships remains largely absent from news articles and public databases. It's unclear whether she had close bonds with anyone or if she navigated life largely on her own, further adding to the mystery and tragedy of her story. Everything came to a head on January 2, 2025 in Harlem, approximately 2:30 p.m., when Jaya Cruz walked into Joe's Grocery, a small neighborhood deli located at 168 Lenox Avenue. Inside the deli that day was Ray Hodge, a 36-year-old postal worker who had stopped in during his shift to grab a quick lunch. Ray, a father of 2 young children, was known in his community and workplace as a dedicated employee and a kind, easygoing person. His stop at the deli was routine, something he likely did dozens of times before. Tragically, this time would be different. According to witness accounts, a disagreement began between Jaya and Ray over something as minor as who was next in line to order food. In the hustle and bustle of a crowded deli, such disputes are not unusual. But this one escalated far more rapidly and dangerously than anyone could have anticipated. Witnesses reported that Jaya became visibly agitated and began shouting at Ray. In a moment of hostility, she spat in his face, a deeply disrespectful act that quickly transformed a verbal altercation into a physical threat. Then, in a horrifying escalation, Jaya reached into her belongings and pulled out a small steak knife. Without hesitation, she lunged at Ray, stabbing him repeatedly in the chest, neck, and arms. The attack was swift, violent, and devastating. Customers and workers in the deli watched in shock and fear as Ray collapsed to the floor, critically wounded. The entire incident unfolded in mere seconds, but its impact would reverberate through families, communities, and headlines for weeks to come. What began as an everyday stop for lunch turned into a nightmare, one that would leave 2 families shattered, a community outraged, and a city asking how a seemingly minor dispute could turn so fatally violent. Emergency services were immediately dispatched following the brutal stabbing of Ray Hodge. As soon as the 911 call came in, first responders rushed to Joe's Grocery in Harlem, where Ray lay bleeding on the floor. Paramedics worked quickly to stabilize him and transported him to Harlem Hospital, just minutes away. Despite their best efforts, the injuries he sustained were far too severe. Not long after his arrival at the hospital, Ray was pronounced dead. The news devastated those who had witnessed the attack, including deli employees, other customers, and passers-by who had gathered outside, trying to understand what had just happened. A minor disagreement over something as trivial as a place in line had suddenly turned into a tragedy. The neighborhood, already familiar with hardship but fiercely protective of its own, was left stunned. A simple lunch break had ended in the loss of a father, a coworker, and a friend. For the people who knew Ray, and even for those who didn't, the senselessness of it all was impossible to grasp. One moment he was there, alive, working, living his day, and the next he was gone. Meanwhile, the person responsible for the violence, 24-year-old Jaya Cruz, fled the scene immediately after the stabbing. Panic and chaos followed in her wake, but she disappeared before police could arrive. The NYPD wasted no time. Given the severity of the crime and Jaya's known presence in the Harlem area, authorities launched a swift and focused manhunt. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, asked residents for information, and monitored known locations where Jaya had previously been seen. Her history with law enforcement made it clear that she was not a stranger to the system, and police were determined to locate her before she could escape or harm anyone else. Later that same evening, their efforts paid off. Police found Jaya at her apartment on West 118th Street, the very block she had grown up on. This time there was no struggle. Unlike some of her prior confrontations with officers, she did not resist arrest. The moment was heavy. Her quiet surrender stood in stark contrast to the violent, impulsive act she had committed just hours earlier. Given Jaya's troubling criminal history, which included several previous arrests involving weapons and aggressive behavior, authorities approached the case with grave seriousness. This was not viewed as an isolated outburst. For investigators, it was part of a broader pattern. A woman with a history of instability and violent altercations who had now taken a life.
And new tonight, the person accused of stabbing a U.S. postal worker to death inside of a Harlem deli takes a plea deal.
Jaya was taken into custody and charged with second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. These charges reflected not only the brutality of her actions that day but also her past conduct, which had raised red flags long before the fatal stab occurred. The story quickly made headlines and drew strong reactions from the community. Some mourned the loss of Ray Hodge and questioned why someone with such a troubling history had been free to commit such a crime. Others looked at Jaya's life with a mixture of anger and sadness, wondering how many missed opportunities there had been to intervene before things reached this point. Police records indicate that Cruz has a history with law enforcement, including at least 2 prior arrests, both involving knives. Friends and neighbors came together, still in shock, to pay tribute to Ray's life.
You know, we all love them in the community. It's a tragic loss. We're going to celebrate them, and we're going to keep the spirit alive. Honorable, stand up. Now, I mean, integrity, morals, principles. He was one of the good young boys we had out here, you heard?
The swift arrest of Jaya Cruz brought a small but much-needed sense of relief to a Harlem community still reeling from the shock and horror of the violence that had erupted just hours earlier. Following the arrest, the New York City Police Department, NYPD, launched a comprehensive investigation into the incident, working closely with the United States Postal Inspection Service, given that the victim, Ray, was a federal employee. Together, the two agencies approached the case with the seriousness and urgency it demanded. Investigators quickly sealed off the crime scene at Joe's Grocery and began collecting physical evidence. Among the most critical pieces was the weapon itself, a small steak knife used in the stabbing. It was found discarded near a pool of blood just outside the deli, a grim and sobering reminder of how quickly things had turned violent. In addition to the physical evidence, detectives relied heavily on eyewitness accounts. Multiple deli patrons had been present during the incident and were able to recount the argument between Jaya and Ray. Their statements helped investigators piece together a clear timeline of events, from the initial disagreement over who was next in line to the shocking moment when Jaya pulled out the knife and began stabbing. Several described the argument as tense but seemingly manageable, right up until it turned deadly. Their testimony painted a picture of a volatile confrontation that escalated far too quickly for anyone to intervene. Surveillance footage from the deli security cameras further supported the witness reports. The video captured key moments of the altercation, including the verbal exchange, the physical aggression, and the final attack. This footage became a crucial part of the prosecution's case, offering undeniable visual evidence of the crime as it unfolded. LGBTQ+ individuals released a public statement on Facebook. They described Jaya Cruz as a transgender woman of color and a lifelong New Yorker, someone who had endured repeated instances of hate violence and public harassment throughout the city. Over the summer, a disturbing video circulated on social media, showing Jaya being violently attacked in broad daylight. The footage drew outrage from some corners of the internet but was also met with silence by many, a silence that, according to advocates, spoke volumes about society's selective empathy. In the week that followed, the incident became a media flashpoint. News outlets reported aggressively, but not always responsibly. Jaya was repeatedly misgendered and ridiculed. Some coverage seemed less interested in justice and more in spectacle, as layers of transmisogyny, racism, and sensationalism distorted public understanding of what happened. The Anti-Violence Project condemned this coverage, calling it a flagrant display of cis supremacy, misogynoir, and transmisogyny. They acknowledged the gravity of the crime, stating that Jaya is now facing serious legal consequences. But they also stressed that she deserves basic human rights while incarcerated, including safety while in Rikers and access to bail. Still, not everyone saw Jaya as a victim of circumstance. Among the comments under the organization's post, a community member named Yakisha Johnson voiced a starkly different perspective. As the legal proceedings move forward, so too does a broader conversation about justice, identity, and the often unseen lives of those on society's margins. This case also highlighted broader systemic failures. Despite Jaya's repeated run-ins with the law, little had been done in terms of intervention, support, or mental health treatment. Opportunities to redirect her path had come and gone, and now the consequences were tragically irreversible. On January 3, 2025, just one day after the fatal stabbing, Jaya Cruz was arraigned in a New York City courtroom. The charges brought against her included second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. During the hearing, the prosecution laid out their argument, focusing not only on the events of the previous day but also on Jaya's criminal past. They emphasized her history of violent behavior and the repeated incidents involving weapons, asserting that she posed a significant and ongoing threat to public safety. The prosecution requested that Jaya be held without bail, arguing that her past and the severity of the current charges made her a danger to the community and a potential flight risk. The presiding judge agreed. Citing the disturbing nature of the crime and her extensive criminal record, the judge ordered that Jaya be remanded into custody, with no option for release while she awaited trial. A message was sent to Jaya's public defender for comment, but no public statement was made at the time. The arraignment marked the beginning of what was certain to become a high-profile and emotionally draining legal battle. One that would play out in courtrooms, news headlines, and community conversations for weeks, if not months, to come. Even though Ray Hodges' life was tragically cut short, his memory lives on. Those who knew him continue to speak of his kindness, his dedication to his work, and the love he had for his children. His death is a painful reminder of how fragile life can be, and how quickly things can turn tragic when violence enters the picture. Our deepest condolences go out to Ray's family, his friends, and everyone affected by this senseless act. May his soul continue to rest in peace.